welcome to another exciting episode of the number one comics podcast. I'm your host, Jonah, and with me is Bill. Bill, how's it going?
Not too bad, Jonah. How are you?
I'm doing well, at the time of this recording, we had Free Comic Book Day just on Saturday.
This past Saturday.
Saturday. Did you have a chance to check it out? I think you said you had other stuff going on.
I did not, unfortunately. I even completely forgot it was Free Comic Book Day, and I got one of those marketing emails from Des Moines Con.
Yep.
That said they were handing out stickers and stuff like that at a few of the locations, but
I had not participated in a Free Comic Book Day in years.
So I've never participated in one.
Yeah.
How does it work exactly?
You just show up at a comic shop and they've got a table set up with certain free comics that usually say Free Comic Book Day on them. So, and I believe the retailers have to buy them from the distributor or from the companies.
Right.
So they're paying something out of pocket for it. But then the idea is they bring people into the shops, introduce people to new stories, new characters, and it's all kinds of comics. It's like superhero comics. It's some indie books. It's kids books or kind of ones that are more for younger audiences.
Very cool.
I didn't pick up one of everything. I just picked up I think one was VR Troopers, I think had a book out this year, which I hadn't seen VR Troopers in forever.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's quite a few of them that I picked up. I haven't really had a chance to sit down and check them out yet, but looking forward to that. The one thing that I was very excited about is some retailers were going to have other incentives or sales going on. Mm-hmm. And it was kind of funny because the shop that I went to doesn't typically, so there's multiple locations. They don't typically sell new comics at this location. They do have some, dollar bins that I love to root through from time to time.
Right.
And the owner, told me they were bringing out a lot more long boxes that they were all going to have as, dollar books that were all 50% off. So basically every book, other than the free comic books, was 50 cents a piece.
Okay.
And so we went through. My brother-in-law was out there, and we got there kind of right when it opened up. And so we were rooting through the books. Another guy showed up, and he tore through those books. He was really fast, flipping through those, and he was pulling out a shitload of stuff. And then find out later on. Well, let me go back. I ended up buying 340 books, something like that. It was a ridiculous amount, but at 50 cents a piece.
Yeah.
Right? So it wasn't terrible. But found out later on that when he was the person bringing the long boxes from other shops into this one was grabbing boxes that were not necessarily dollar boxes.
Oh.
They were kind of just regular long boxes.
Uh-oh.
And so I got to go through and see kind of what I ended up with. My brother-in-law ended up with a shitload of Milk and Cheese issues, including the first issue of that, which, that's not a cheap comic necessarily.
Right.
And so our buddy who owns the shop, he's like, you fucking guys got one over me. And I was like, oh man, I kind of felt bad.
Yeah.
And I don't know if someone lost their job in that or not.
Right.
I am excited though to go through the long box or basically I walked out with one long box and then a short box.
Okay.
And I'm really excited to go through those to see kind of what I did end up with and if there was any real gems in there. Because here's the deal. I'm not looking for things that are worth money necessarily. I'm looking for oh, that's a cool cover. That looks like a fun story.
Right.
I never heard of this one. That looks cool or whatever. One of the ones, I didn't even realize that DC had done this. And if I did, I'd forgotten all about it. But at one point, they had DC characters joining with Hanna-Barbera characters.
Huh.
So I picked up a couple of comics that's Superman and Magilla Gorilla.
Really?
And then there's Superman and Tomcat. And so there's all kinds of weird ones like that. I'm
that's kind
they're
of
not
fun,
necessarily
though.
Old comics. They look like they're relatively new, but I was that's cool. I hadn't heard of that. So anyway, hopefully you guys out there had a chance to participate in Free Comic Book Day as well. If not, hopefully it continues because I think it was kind of a Diamond distribution thing, and Diamond's not really a thing anymore, or will not be a thing anymore with their bankruptcy troubles. So I don't know what's going to happen to Free Comic Book Day going forward. But it's always fun.
Yeah.
And I'm glad I went back this year. So, but that's not ultimately what we're here to talk about. We are here to talk about another #1 comic. This is Pitt #1 from Image Comics. That's the publisher. Cover date on this was January of 1993, and the cover price on it was $1.95. Pitt was created by Dale Keown. Keown was also he also did the pencils and inks on this, and then Brian, I believe it's Houghton, if I'm not mistaken, is listed as the writer. Now, did you read any of, or not read, see any of Keown's previous work? Because you did check out Pitt when it was new in stores, right?
Right.
Back in the day.
Yeah.
I think every 90s kid was picking up all of those Image titles as they could,
and,
if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, and another thing we've talked about previously, too, was I didn't have a subscription, but I picked up every Wizard magazine I could get my hands on.
Hell yeah.
So I'd always see like the splash pages of, new Image comics coming out. And
I was not a Hulk reader back in the day. So I didn't really, I think Pitt was probably the first time that I noticed or saw Keown's artwork. But he did make a name for himself on Marvel's Incredible Hulk title first. He left Marvel in 1993. He did that to go and do, the self-publishing of this self-created title over at Image. He was actually offered founder status originally. He was offered that after Whilce Portacio, who we talked about previously with Wetworks, after he was forced to withdraw because of his sister, but Keown had declined that, so he didn't take him up on that. Now the Pitt series is Brian Houghton's only credited comic work. Because he's a writer I was not familiar with, so I had to do some Google searching. It looks like he's a Canadian-based musician and songwriter, and so my assumption is he was probably one of Keown's friends or something like that, and Keown was like, hey, I want to draw this, will you write it? And he was like, sure. So I'm guessing that's how that happened. I don't really know. But for those of you who may not be familiar with what Pitt is an alien-human hybrid created by an alien race known as the Creed. He's been engineered to be the perfect killing machine. Among his powers and abilities are super strength, stamina, durability. He's got enhanced healing factor, and he's got some big-ass claws that come out of his hands, which was like my favorite thing about him and why I thought he was way cooler than the Hulk.
Yeah.
Now, some sources that I've come across have cited Young Blood issue 4 as Pitt's first appearance. However, I think that issue came out after this one.
Okay.
So I think the cover date might have been earlier, but if I recall correctly, that issue was delayed, and so I think this came first, and then Youngblood 4 had come out shortly thereafter, which that was not uncommon among those early Image titles. Something would get delayed. Right. But yeah, Youngblood 4 basically had a backup story which introduced us to the characters in this book, and that backup feature is referenced really several times throughout here. Anyway, let's anything else you want to say about the character itself before we get into the interior?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Well, let's get into it. Let's start with the cover. It's really easy to sum up because it's his giant face. It looks badass though. We're told at the bottom that this is a ripping first issue. Once we get inside or past the cover, we start out in New York City at 3 a.m. This is the Detroit chapter of a motorcycle gang called the Vipers. They're kind of making the rounds, tearing up the town. I am curious as to why they're making the rounds in New York City if they're from Detroit. But I think they actually reference at some point how weird that city is. I think maybe compared to where they're from or something along those lines.
Right.
But anyway, I digress. They see Pitt kind of walking down the street. In the distance, he's huge. He's butt-ass naked. The Vipers roar up behind him, and one hits him in the back of the head with a bat. Another bashes Pitt in the side of the face with a flail. And that gets Pitt's attention, but he doesn't go down. Pitt fights back. After taking out the two that drew first blood, he tears through the rest of the bikes, and he's just throwing these things around. That's a really cool splash image of him tossing these bikes and dudes all around. The motorcycles, their riders, they're being tossed in all directions. One of the Vipers shoots Pitt point blank with a double-barreled shotgun. However, I did notice, and this bothered me, and it might be because I don't want to say I'm a gun nut, but I'm a enthusiast.
Right. And
when it's a picture of a double-barreled shotgun, but it's making the sound of like a pump-action shotgun.
Right.
When the onomatopoeia doesn't match the image with something like that, it like bothers me. So I did notice that. Anyway, again, I digress. I don't want to end up down a rabbit hole there. All the blast does is piss Pitt off. Large claws protrude from his giant hands, and the last thing his assailant sees is Pitt's massive fangs bearing down on him. We then cut to a young boy who sees this in a nightmare, and it snaps him awake in his bed, and the boy screams out, which brings his grandfather into the room. So the boy tells Grandpa about his nightmare, but that it's real and that it's happening at that very moment. It sounds like, based on what the grandfather says, that they've already had quite the night, and then that's kind of that first callback to that Youngblood issue 4 scene. Mm-hmm. It's revealed to us that the child's parents are dead and that he's being raised by his grandfather. We then cut to a different part of the city where a new detective is being brought in to handle the subway case. I don't know if this is happening at the same time as the other scenes, because keep in mind, that's like 3 o'clock in the morning.
Right. And
this detective's like coming in, and maybe they're starting their shift at 3 a.m. I don't know. That just seems really early to be clocking in as a detective, but I could be wrong. I'm not a detective. I don't know what their hours are. Anyway, this detective is being brought in to handle the subway case. Again, that's another reference to that Image issue 4. Or Youngblood issue 4. The detective's name is Bobby Harris, which I believe is a reference to Bob Harris, the Marvel editor at the time. Mm-hmm. And she is being partnered with another detective named Smithers. The police look over photos of the Pitt from his appearance on the subway, again, back in issue 4 of Youngblood. They mention a gang of neo-Nazis attacked some pedestrians when this mysterious third party arrived, or rather, just appeared. The captain orders Harris and her new partner Smithers to link up with forensics at the crime scene. We then cut back to Pitt standing among the carnage from his battle with the biker gang. And again, that tells me that scene with the detectives, all that is happening at like 3 o'clock in the morning. Yeah. Because we cut back to Pitt, he's standing amongst the carnage. There's a voice within him that urges discretion, and Pitt responds that he will not retreat from battle and that he is a warrior. We're then taken to a flashback in which a group of alien Buddhists, I don't know, for lack of a better term, I don't know what they're, that's the closest thing I could link them to. Yeah. They're attacked by another group of aliens called the Creed. And this is playing out as a memory in Pitt's head, essentially. That is, until he's heard enough of this memory or of this voice in his head, and he reminds him that, and this voice reminds him, rather, that he's not at war with this planet, but he may in fact play a role in its salvation. We then cut to Times Square subway station. The police are still investigating the crime scene. Some transit officer person is not happy that the train is still locked down as an active crime scene, as it really throws an expletive of some sort into her day. On the subway car itself, the forensics team is gathering evidence. There is some sort of electrical discharge that's building up behind them. And then we cut to outside where Harris and Smithers pull up, and they hear gunfire. It's coming from the subway below, and they rush down to check it out. They arrive on the scene, and really it's just in time to see 3 of their fellow officers thrown right into a brick wall. Smithers tells Harris to wait for backup, but Harris isn't listening. They turn the corner, and she's like, "Freeze!" Only to see 3 massive monsters standing there, and that is where we are going to be continued. Let's talk about our thoughts on this issue. Bill, what were your thoughts?
One thing that they do in this comic very well is a lot of the action panels, if you will, take up the majority of the page.
Yeah.
Which I think is, my 90s experience for Marvel. They kind of went like panel to panel, and sometimes it was kind of like a little bit difficult to follow sometimes. They'd have to cut something off, put those little arrows in, all that sort of stuff. This is really cool. It makes it feel like a kind of like an action movie played out on a comic book.
It is very splashy, and this is kind of where you started to get into that style over substance debate. And you could easily make that argument here because my first thought about this book, I would have to start with the art, because that is why people were buying Image Comics anyway.
Yeah, absolutely.
In the 90s was art like this. And if we talk about the story too much, it's a much shorter discussion, right? Because there's really not a lot to the story as a whole. It's almost like half an issue worth of story, in my opinion.
Yeah.
With callbacks to something else that hadn't even really happened yet, or was really just a snippet. But yeah, Keown's art is absolutely fantastic. It was, like I said, I was never aware of his art on Hulk since I wasn't a Hulk reader at the time.
I wasn't either.
But, I mean, if it was half as good as what this is, damn. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
The attention to detail and the way that he, also the fact that he inks his own work, I think is what adds to that attention to detail, because the inks really do a good job of bringing those images to life.
Oh, yeah.
It's funny because we talked about, when we were kind of running through the synopsis and we were talking about the encounter with the motorcycle gang, that's like the first 10 pages. And it literally took me a few seconds to describe, but that's 10 pages of a 22-page story essentially. Is him fighting with these motorcycle gangs. And the one thing that I noticed in that, or what detracted me from it, was the dialogue. If they had taken out the dialogue, I think it would have been a much stronger first 10 pages.
I agree.
Now, I don't know what you would have had in place.
Well,
Whether it be narration of some sort, or even just leave it as it is.
There's a lot of the newer comics we've covered on this show where they have all this action going on and no dialogue whatsoever, like no explanation, nothing. You're just kind of following these characters walking through a hallway or whatever it might be. I think that might have added to it a little bit.
Yeah, I think so. I think it would have, because I think it would have given you a chance to still study the art, and the art tells the story itself. You don't need any of the words in there in those first 10 page, that opening scene. You don't need any words to tell any part of that story.
Well, and I think, you talk
exposition or anything like that.
Right. And you mentioned the whole style over substance kind of thing. I think that, especially with the first issue, and especially with the artwork being so prominent in this comic, like, you want to focus more on the art than you do the story.
Right.
They can always build on the story in the next few issues or so, but Image did that really well, in my opinion. They always did. I always felt like they focused on the art over the story to some extent, but
100%.
Not in a bad way.
Sometimes in a bad way.
Sometimes in a bad way, but I always liked Image strictly for their artwork.
Right. Like I said, I think that's why most people were buying it, and that's why, just as an example of kind of how noticeable that is, that's why you've got things like last month, Rob Liefeld recently re-released through Image a Youngblood #1 that it completely re-scripted by Joe Casey, if I'm not mistaken. So completely re-scripted, and you read it, and the art's still really good to look at. The story was still just okay, in my opinion, but it's one of those things where I think if you could go back and maybe re-script some of it, not necessarily Pitt exclusively, but a lot of those old, issues, I think could benefit well from it. Now, I also don't necessarily agree with that because I like letting it stand as it is on its own. And then you can also kind of see the, a artist or a writer's growth over the years. But yeah, I agree with your point 100%. One more thing about the art too, before I move away from that, is Keown's really good about drawing different body types and faces really well. Not everyone looks the exact same. Couldn't say that about all the other image artists at the time, and not everyone was, I think McFarlane also did a really good job of this, but just different body styles. Not everyone looks like they belong in a comic book. You know what I mean? And so that's really good. The other thing, too, the last thing I'll mention about the art is Keown is really, really good at conveying a sense of motion. Whether Pitt's jumping at you, or the scene where those officers are being tossed into that wall is so good because you can feel the thuds of them hitting that wall. It's very kinetic. It's not it's not static. You can feel the movement in the panel, and that's so important in a comic like this. Anything else about the art that you want to mention, and then we'll talk a little bit about the story?
Just that, like, even without ever reading this comic before, Pitt's a very recognizable character.
Yes.
I knew who Pitt was before I even read this, and I think that's what really made him stand out as a character to me. That and, seeing him in Wizard Comics, or Wizard Magazine rather.
Was it issue 15 he was on? It was with the darker image characters, so it was like Pitt, Max, Bloodwolf,
I think so.
And who was the fourth? There was another one on there. I probably even have it in my notes.
Right.
But yeah, I think that was the first time I saw Pitt too, because that came out before the issue did, if I'm not mistaken. And I was, just from that, I was like, I got to find, when this comes out, I've got to pick it up. And I did. I picked up, as a kid, I picked up the first 5 or 6 issues. Then what happens, I think, if there's a delay in there, or if something, you miss a month or that week at the comic shop, and then you can't find it again. And when you're relying on your dad to take you to the comic shop, you couldn't always get there when you wanted to get there. And so I missed issues here and there, and then eventually it fell off my radar. Which all comics fell off my radar about that point anyway. So let's all right. So let's talk about the. One more thing too I want to mention on the art before we move on, and I apologize about that. The character himself, the design of the character, because it's so easy with a lot of the image creators to look at their original creations and be like, okay, it's a derivative of this, this, or this. Spawn is a derivative. You can see Spider-Man in Spawn. You can see Cable in Deadpool and everything that Liefeld does. You can see all of that, and you can see the Hulk inspirations in Pitt. But I think that there's enough differences between the characters in terms of the look, the design. I don't look at it as like a direct copy. He's enough of his own character, in my opinion. In fact, I would argue that I think Marvel 2099 Hulk is more of a copy of Pitt than Pitt is a copy of Hulk.
I would agree.
So that's the other thing I want to say is I absolutely love the character design, and I know it's it's derivative of the Hulk, but it's still different enough that I'm like, oh, that's really cool. And it doesn't bother me one bit. Okay. Let's talk story. So it's pretty much non-existent. Right? I mean, there's really not a lot going on here story-wise. There is several callbacks to what happened in Youngblood 4. And like I said, 22 pages. 3 of those pages are splash pages, and 10 of those 22 pages is the one fight sequence in the beginning.
Right.
So we're given very little backstory of Pitt or really any of the supporting characters, because I think even in the Young Blood issue 4, you just kind of you see Grandpa, you see Timmy or the kid, you see the Pitt, but you don't. It's really just a snippet of a scene, right? It's like a sneak preview. So you really don't learn about it much there either. The dialogue is pretty terrible. I have a few examples of the dialogue quoted on here. Like one I'm not even gonna, I don't want to get into the examples. I've got them on my phone, but I will. I'm gonna just read this real quick. Okay, here we go. I will play both characters here.
Okay.
I'm Philip Johnson. You can call me Phil. Are those photos of the incident? That's what I was told. They're in a sealed envelope marked confidential. Thanks for picking them up on your way into the station, Harris. I'll fill you in while we look over the shots. Wow, that's so bad.
Yeah.
It's whoever wrote this did not read these out loud. This one's my favorite, though. How long do you plan to hold this subway car, Sergeant? As long as it takes to get the job done. You got a problem with that? Yeah, I got a problem with that. This car was due at Coney Island 3 hours ago. This really throws a fuck into my day. Now, I don't know if that's even what the expletive is, but I can't figure out what type of expletive actually fits there.
I don't either.
But yeah, the dialogue is just real bad. Is it Smithers when Smithers and Harris arrive on scene and he's like talking to her, and I don't know why because we've encountered this before, even in like when we were talking like Silver Sable #1. Whenever you get these like strong female characters, you have these like dudes that want to like sexualize them in some way or knock them down a peg by objectifying them.
Yeah.
And I'm not the kind of I don't get into the whole like, oh, let's get woke or anything like that. Like that drives me insane.
Right.
But this also drives me insane. Is this, and it was a very 90s thing, right? Mm-hmm. So there's this when they pull up, Smithers is saying to Harris, he says, "You know, my last partner used to be jealous because I used to get all the chicks. I guess that won't be a problem with you, eh, Harris? Unless you go in for that kind of action. If so, maybe we could ... And I'm like, what?
Yeah.
It's so bad.
Yeah.
And this entire comic would read better as a silent issue now that I think about it. Like, you just take out all the dialogue, and this would be so much better. And I'm not saying I don't enjoy it, but...
Right, but I think that's a product of kind of the
issue as
the
a whole.
time.
I mean, yeah.
But, you know, they can't just have a conversation. He's got to immediately make it creepy.
That's the thing, is like, again, it's almost like whoever wrote this has never talked to a woman.
Yeah.
And didn't read this out loud. All right, let's talk a little bit about what came next. So Pitt ran for 20 issues, so not a long run. Mm-hmm. The first several were published through Image Comics. Issues 10 through 20, it moved over to Keown's own Full Bleed Studios. Mm-hmm. And that's really where I think I dropped off, because I think for whatever reason, I just couldn't find them. Like, I could not find the later issues of this comic as a kid. Aside from his own title, he also appeared periodically in other Image comics like Gen 13, Savage Dragon, The Max. The last appearance of Pitt that I know of was in a crossover with Darkness. That was published in August of 2009. So we really haven't seen him for, almost 20 years at this point.
Yeah.
I did come across an article as I was, doing some research for this that touted, it was an article on a website or a periodical called criticalblast.com, which I've never heard of it. Mm-hmm. It was from back in 2022, and it touted the return of the Pitt in comics. Now, I don't know what's ever come of that, but I would love to see this guy to return in comics in some form or another, because I think he's very cool. What are your final thoughts?
I definitely would have read more. I'm kind of kicking myself now for not really getting into this, but I could say that about a lot of the Image series, ones that we've covered and ones that we probably haven't yet. I was just like such a hardcore Spider-Man Marvel guy back in the day,
I was too. And even with the Image comics that I was getting, I mean, I did pick up the Pitts when I could find them, right? But it was Stormwatch and Youngblood, Max, Shadowhawk. I'm trying to think. I mean, there was a lot of them that I was about, but then there's a lot of them that I just kind of passed for whatever reason. Like,
right.
And I was that kid. I had to pick up all the number ones, right? Like, thinking I'd retire early off of my Wildcats number one,
which was very easy to do in the 90s because there was a new number one every week.
Yes, which is why we have this show today.
Exactly.
And I will never run out of content because there will always be new number ones to talk about. In terms of this series, I know I don't have a full run of Pitt. I can tell you right now. I've got it right here. I'm missing issues 11 and 13 through 20. So like I said, most everything that went over to Full Bleed, I don't have.
Right.
So I'm still tracking those down, as I find them, especially cheaply.
Yeah.
In fact, my brother-in-law just picked up this first issue of Pitt for 50 cents.
Nice.
It's not. It's not a 50-cent comic necessarily. It's like a $20 comic.
Yeah.
He got it for 50 cents. So you can find them out there in a good deal if you're patient and keep your eyes open for them.
Yeah.
My final thoughts on it: the issue is worth checking out for the art alone.
Absolutely.
Forget about put your brain on hold for the story. The art is gorgeous. Throughout the series, the story was always just okay, but the art was always really good, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So check it out. This is Pitt number 1 from Image Comics. Thanks for tuning in. Be sure to check us out on Facebook. You can find us as part of the Field of Geeks network, wherever you get your podcasts, or on YouTube, which, if you're watching this on YouTube, you probably already know that. Special thanks to everyone at the Field of Geeks network for making this episode happen.
Absolutely.
Special thanks to Raven X for the theme song. Like, subscribe. What are the other terms that kids use when it comes to
like, share, and subscribe?
Yeah, like, share, and subscribe.
Yeah.
Appreciate it, and we'll see you guys next time. Thanks, Bill.
See you.